The galactic diplomatic chamber buzzed with chatter as various alien species gathered for what they assumed would be another routine integration meeting. The chamber, with its high crystal ceilings and floating holographic displays, hosted representatives from across the known universe. "And now we discuss the matter of humans," announced Ambassador Srill, his translucent tentacles rippling with barely concealed amusement. The word humans emerged from his speech synthesizer, as if it were discussing a particularly amusing pet. A chorus of chittering laughter echoed through the chamber. Ambassador Kree, a towering insectoid with gleaming compound eyes, tapped his mandibles together in what passed for a smirk in his species. "Ah, yes, the bipedal creatures who still get excited about achieving faster-than-light travel. How quaint." "Did you know," chirped Council Member Plix, her feathered crest rising in excitement, "they still use projectile weapons, actual physical projectiles. Can you imagine?" The gathering of galactic representatives continued their friendly mockery, sharing stories about human achievements, as if discussing a child's crude crayon drawings. Holograms displayed various human technologies, each met with more condescending commentary. "They're quite proud of their nuclear fission," noted Ambassador Etril, causing another round of chittering laughter. "Should we tell them we used that for cooking food 10,000 years ago?" The doors to the chamber slid open with a soft hiss, momentarily interrupting the jovial atmosphere. A human male strode in, wearing the formal diplomatic uniform of the United Earth Coalition. His name tag read James Rodriguez, Human Military Liaison. James's boots clicked against the polished floor as he approached the central platform, each step measured and purposeful. His face wore an expression that could only be described as the look of someone who knew a hilarious secret but wasn't allowed to share it yet. "Ah, our human representative arrives," Ambassador Zriel announced, his tentacles wiggling in what he thought was a welcoming gesture. "We were just discussing your species' technological achievements. Most impressive for your development stage." James smiled, not the diplomatic smile they were used to seeing from other human representatives, but the kind of smile a wolf might give if it could smile. "Thank you, Ambassador. Always good to hear our allies' perspectives on human capabilities." Council Member Plix fluttered down to peer at James more closely. "We understand you served in your planet's military forces. How fascinating. Tell us, what was it like using such traditional weapons?" James's smile widened just a fraction. "Ma'am, I served with the Marine Corps for 15 years, saw action in 3 different campaigns. But you know what's really interesting?" He paused, looking around the chamber. "The fact that none of you have asked why we have so many rules about how we fight wars." The chamber grew quieter, the background chatter dying down as James's words hung in the air. Ambassador Kree's antennae twitched. "Rules? For warfare? What an odd concept. Why would you need rules for such a primitive form of conflict resolution?" James leaned against the central platform, his posture relaxed, but somehow making several of the alien diplomats feel unexpectedly nervous. "Well, funny story about that. It all started because we kept coming up with too many creative ways to kill each other. Had to draw the line somewhere." Ambassador Srill's tentacles stopped their amused wiggling. "Creative ways." "Oh, yeah," James nodded, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed mirth. "In fact, if you're interested, I'd love to explain why we had to specifically ban certain weapons and tactics. It's quite the history lesson." The chamber fell completely silent now, the earlier mockery forgotten as James pulled out a datapad. "Should we start with the basic war crimes, or jump straight to the really interesting stuff that made us write new laws?" Ambassador Xreal's translation device might have been malfunctioning, because surely the human wasn't suggesting. "Perhaps we should begin with your basic military protocols," he suggested weakly. "Nah," James waved his hand dismissively. "Let's start with why we had to ban creative uses of white phosphorus. That's always a fun story at parties." The gathered diplomats exchanged nervous glances. Suddenly the human didn't seem quite so primitive anymore. Ambassador Kree stepped forward, eager to redirect the conversation to more comfortable territory. His mandibles clicked as he activated a holographic display showing sleek, crystalline ships firing beams of pure energy. "Perhaps we should demonstrate our own methods of conflict resolution," he chittered proudly. "Our species has evolved beyond crude physical combat. We employ precision energy weapons that cause minimal structural damage and temporary neural disruption." James snorted, quickly turning it into an unconvincing cough. "Something amuses you, human Rodriguez?" asked Council Member Plix, her feathers ruffling slightly. "No, no," James said, waving his hand while his shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. "Please, continue explaining how your weapons are designed to be— what was it? Minimal damage?" Ambassador Xrill's tentacles writhed with pride. "Indeed, our most advanced warships can incapacitate an enemy vessel without destroying it. The crew experiences only minor discomfort. See here." He gestured to another hologram showing a ship being enveloped in a soft blue light. James lost it. His laughter echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the crystal walls. Several alien diplomats stepped back, startled by the sudden outburst. "I'm sorry," he wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. "But you're telling me you deliberately made your weapons less lethal? And you think that's advanced?" "Of course," Ambassador Kree stated firmly. "It shows our evolutionary superiority. Our conflicts end with minimal casualties." James straightened up, still chuckling. Right. Hey, quick question. You folks ever hear of something called shotgun spread? Or better yet, carpet bombing?" The aliens exchanged confused glances. "Or here's a fun one," James continued, pulling up his own holographic display. "This is what we humans call a claymore mine. See, the interesting part isn't just that it explodes, it's the pattern of the shrapnel dispersion." The chamber grew uncomfortably quiet as James began drawing diagrams in the air. "Now, the really clever bit is the engineering behind the fragmentatio—" "Surely," interrupted Ambassador Xrill, his tentacles now a pale shade of grey, "your species has moved beyond such methods." "Oh, absolutely," James nodded seriously. "These days we've got much more interesting toys. Want to hear about our advancements in autonomous drone swarms? Or maybe you'd be interested in our experiments with sonic weapons." Councilmember Plix's crest deflated slightly. "Sonic weapons?" "Yeah. See, we figured out that certain frequencies can turn your internal organs into soup. Fascinating stuff, really. Though personally, I'm more impressed by our developments in thermobaric explosives. You know, the ones that create a vacuum so powerful it ruptures your lungs." The alien diplomats watched in growing horror as James enthusiastically explained human weapons development with the same tone one might use to describe a favorite hobby. "But wait," Ambassador Kree interrupted, his compound eyes flickering rapidly. "Your official reports indicate your military technology is still in its early stages." James grinned. "Oh man, you actually believe those reports? That's adorable. Hey, want to know why we had to ban biological weapons? This is a great story, back in World War I. "Perhaps," Ambassador Xrill cut in quickly, his voice synthesizer crackling with stress. "We should take a brief recess." "Already? But I haven't even gotten to explain how we weaponize the weather. Did you know you can trigger earthquakes if you try hard enough?" The alien diplomats began backing away slowly as James pulled up more holograms, each showing increasingly disturbing examples of human military innovation. "And this," he said, pointing to a particularly complex diagram, "is just what we came up with for fun. You should see what we developed when we were actually trying to kill each other." "Your species," Councilmember Plix asked hesitantly, "developed these weapons for fun?" "Well, sure. Nothing brings out human creativity like figuring out new ways to blow stuff up. Speaking of which, have you guys heard about our space weapons programs? Because let me tell you about kinetic bombardment." Ambassador Xrill's translation device definitely wasn't malfunctioning now, as it picked up James's enthusiastic descriptions of turning satellites into weapons platforms. But your species claims to be peaceful," protested Ambassador Kree. James's grin turned predatory. "Oh, we are peaceful. Very peaceful. We just like to make sure we have options, just in case. Would you like to hear about our contingency plans?" The chamber erupted in panicked whispers as the alien diplomats began urgently updating their species' threat assessments. In the center of it all, James Rodriguez stood with his hands in his pockets, whistling what sounded suspiciously like the Marines' hymn. "Don't worry," he called out to the retreating diplomats. "I haven't even gotten to the really good stuff yet." Ambassador Ixril, having somewhat recovered his composure during the brief recess, raised his tentacles for attention. "Perhaps, human Rodriguez, you could explain these rules of warfare you mentioned earlier? The Geneva Conventions?" James brightened. "Sure, it's pretty simple, really. See, we kept coming up with so many creative ways to kill each other that eventually someone said, 'Hey, maybe we should set some boundaries.'" Councilmember Plix nervously preened her feathers. "And these boundaries were basic stuff, really. No poisonous gas, no shooting medics, no torturing prisoners, no intentionally targeting civilians. You know, common sense things that apparently we needed to write down because someone kept doing them anyway." The chamber fell into a horrified silence. You needed written rules to not do these things." Ambassador Kree's mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. "Oh yeah, and the funny part?" James leaned forward conspiratorially. "We had to keep updating them because humans kept finding loopholes." Ambassador Ixril's color shifted to a sickly pale shade. "Loopholes in not committing atrocities?" "Exactly." James pulled out his datapad again. "Like, take flamethrowers, for example. We couldn't technically ban them completely because they were legitimate weapons of war, but we had to make very specific rules about not using them against civilians because, well, you can probably guess why." I don't think I want to," whispered Councilmember Plix. "Then there's the whole thing with expanding bullets. See, regular bullets weren't causing enough damage for some folks' taste, so they started designing ones that would expand inside the body. Had to specifically ban those too." Ambassador Kree's antennae drooped. "Your species deliberately engineered projectiles to cause more pain." "More pain? Nah, that was just a bonus. We were really going for maximum tissue damage." James paused thoughtfully. "Though I guess that gas that made your skin melt off was probably more about the pain." Several alien diplomats looked like they might be sick, assuming their species had that capability. "But hey," James continued cheerfully, "that's why we made the rules. Though it did lead to some interesting debates. Like, technically, you're not allowed to use serrated bayonets because they cause unnecessary suffering. But smooth bayonets, totally fine." "Your species," Ambassador Srill said slowly, "needed to specify what kind of knife you could attach to your projectile weapons." "Knife?" James laughed. No, a bayonet's way bigger than a regular knife. Want to see the diagrams for optimal penetration angles?" "No!" chorused several diplomats simultaneously. "Your loss. The field manual illustrations are fascinating, especially the ones about proper technique for, well, never mind. Probably best not to get into that before lunch." A young diplomatic aide scurried up to Ambassador Kree, whispering urgently. The ambassador's compound eyes widened. "Our research team just found references to something called the Hague Conventions. These were different rules." "Oh man," James grinned, "those were the warm-up rules. See, before we got to Geneva, we had to establish basic stuff like not using poison weapons, not shooting surrendering soldiers, not bombing undefended towns. You know, the really obvious things that apparently weren't obvious enough." The aide fainted. "But the best part," James continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing distress around him, "we had to make these rules retroactive. Because every time there was a war, someone would come up with some new horrific thing, and everyone would go, 'Wow, we should probably ban that for next time.'" "Next time?" Ambassador Shrill's voice synthesizer crackled. "You made rules assuming there would be a next time." "Well, yeah, I mean, we're not savages. We like to know what's allowed and what isn't before we start fighting." James paused. "Though I guess that whole thing with the war crime trials after World War II proved that some folks weren't really paying attention to the rules. There were so many violations you needed special trials. Council Member Plix asked faintly. Special trials, new classifications, updated definitions. Listen, you haven't lived until you've sat through a 3-hour lecture on the specific legal difference between legitimate military target and protected civilian infrastructure. James chuckled. The PowerPoint presentations alone could probably qualify as psychological warfare. The chamber had grown so quiet you could hear the soft whirring of environmental systems. But hey, James said brightly, at least we're making progress. These days, most nations mostly follow most of the rules most of the time, usually, unless they think they can get away with it, or they're really angry, or bored, or Tuesday. Ambassador Ixril's tentacles had completely lost their color. Your species created such horrific weapons and tactics that you needed multiple international treaties just to establish basic limits on warfare. And you still sometimes ignore them? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad, James shrugged. But look on the bright side. At least we're trying to regulate our wars. Would you like to hear about the stuff we did before we had rules? No, shouted every conscious being in the chamber. Your loss. The story about the development of Greek fire is particularly interesting. Did you know we figured out how to make water burn? The sound of multiple alien translation devices crashing filled the air as their operators processed that last statement. Look, Ambassador Srill said, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should focus on your current military capabilities. Surely your modern methods are more restrained? James scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, just last week, our weapons R&D department accidentally created a new type of explosive while trying to develop better coffee creamer. Coffee creamer? Council Member Plix asked weakly. Yeah. Turns out the chemical composition was surprisingly similar to... You know what? Never mind. The point is, we're pretty good at finding military applications for everyday things. Give a human soldier some duct tape and a paperclip, and they'll build you a weapon of mass destruction. Ambassador Kree's mandibles clattered nervously. Surely you're exaggerating. Am I, though? James pulled up another hologram. This is what we call a potato gun. Completely harmless hobby project, right? Now, let me show you what happens when you modify it slightly. The resulting demonstration caused 3 more diplomatic aides to faint. And that's just what we do for fun. Wait until you see our actual military innovations. Anyone interested in learning about depleted uranium rounds? Please. Ambassador Zrill's tentacles were now completely white. No more weapons demonstrations. Fine. How about something simpler? Like our advancements in orbital kinetic bombardment. We call it rods from God. Basically, we drop tungsten rods from space and let gravity do the work. No explosives required. The chamber erupted in chaos as various alien species tried to process the concept of weaponizing gravity itself. The best part, James continued, seemingly oblivious to the panic, is that technically it doesn't violate any space weapons treaties, because apparently nobody thought to ban dropping metal sticks from orbit. A frantic diplomatic aide rushed in with a data tablet. Ambassador Srill! Our analysts just finished processing their report on human weapon development patterns. And? Exrill asked, dreading the answer. They say humans have weaponized nearly every scientific discovery they've ever made. Even their medical advancements have military applications. James nodded enthusiastically. Oh yeah, you should see what our pharmaceutical companies can do when they put their minds to it. Did you know we originally developed superglue for closing battlefield wounds? The aide made a strangled noise and ran from the chamber. But my personal favorite, James said, warming to his subject, is how we figured out you could use weather satellites for targeting systems. Talk about dual-use technology. Ambassador Kree's compound eyes started rapidly changing colors. Your species weaponized weather monitoring equipment? Well, yeah. We pretty much weaponize everything eventually. It's kind of our thing. Give us any new technology, and within a week, someone will figure out how to make it explode. Council Member Plix's feathers were now completely flat against her body. Even peaceful technologies? Especially peaceful technologies. Those are the best ones to weaponize because nobody expects it. Like that time we figured out you could use commercial GPS systems to guide missiles. The chamber's emergency alert system suddenly blared to life as multiple species simultaneously upgraded humanity's threat assessment level. "Oh, come on," James protested over the noise. "I haven't even gotten to the really creative stuff yet. Want to hear about our experiments with antimatter?" "Antimatter?" shrieked several diplomats in unison. "Just small amounts, barely enough to level a continent." James paused. "That was a joke, by the way. Antimatter weapons are still theoretical. Mostly. Probably. We think—" Ambassador Cyril's translation device gave up entirely and started emitting a high-pitched whine. "Though if you really want to be impressed," James added helpfully, "you should see what we can do with a microwave and some common household chemicals." "Please stop," Ambassador Cree finally shouted, his professional demeanor cracking completely. "What? I'm just trying to be thorough in explaining our capabilities. Hey, did I mention we once accidentally weaponized silly string? That was a fun day at the lab." The chamber's emergency evacuation protocols activated as the alien diplomats finally reached their breaking point. As sirens wailed and emergency lights flashed, James stood in the center of the chaos, hands in his pockets, whistling cheerfully. "Was it something I said?" he called out to the retreating forms. "I haven't even shown you guys our PowerPoint presentations yet." The sound of running feet and panicked alien screaming was his only answer. 3 days after what was now being called the Rodriguez incident, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to update humanity's classification in their species database. Ambassador Cyril, still looking slightly pale, stood before the assembled representatives. "Based on recent revelations, we propose the following changes to humanity's threat assessment." He activated a holographic display showing the new classification. "Humanity, classification, oh no. Threat level, yes. Diplomatic advisory, just agree with whatever they want. Special notes, they weaponized coffee creamer. Additional warning, species appears to view the laws of physics as polite suggestions rather than actual laws." Furthermore, Ambassador Cree added, his mandibles still twitching nervously, "We recommend immediate approval of all reasonable human requests, and some unreasonable ones, just to be safe." Council member Plix, whose feathers had yet to fully refluff, raised a wing. "What about Rodriguez?" "Ah, yes," Ambassador Cyril said, checking his notes. "Following the incident, the Human Diplomatic Corps has promoted him to Chief Liaison Officer. Apparently they were impressed by his honest and open communication style." A collective shudder ran through the chamber. "On the bright side," Ambassador Cree offered, "at least now we know why humans kept insisting on including that 'please don't blow up our planet' clause in all their treaties." "Yes," Cyril agreed, "though I'm more concerned about their request to add a no-backseas addendum to the non-proliferation agreement." The chamber doors slid open, and James Rodriguez strode in, now wearing a shiny new diplomatic badge. "Hey everyone," he called out cheerfully. "Just wanted to let you know I've prepared a comprehensive presentation on human industrial capabilities. Anyone interested in learning how we turned a soft drink factory into a munitions plant in under 48 hours? The chamber emptied in record time. James stood alone in the center of the room, grinning. He pulled out his communicator and dialed Earth. "Mission accomplished, General. They've upgraded our classification from mostly harmless to oh God please no. Also, they've approved our request for unrestricted access to their trade routes." He paused, listening. "No, sir, I didn't have to show them the folder marked actual weapons. The coffee creamer story was enough." Another pause. "Yes, sir, I'll make sure to mention the Spork incident at next week's meeting. Rodriguez out." As he walked out of the chamber, James started whistling again, this time, "When Johnny Comes Marching Home." Behind him, the holographic display still flickered. "Emergency protocol update. In the event of human conflict, hide and hope they don't notice you. P.S. Do not ask about the Spork incident."